Last Christmas. My daughter stood with tears in her eyes while every other grandchild held a brand new iPhone 16 Pro Max, and my mother-in-law looked her in the face and said she didn't deserve one. What followed tore our family apart and led to a revenge she never saw coming. Some people think money can buy respect, but they're wrong. Sometimes it takes publicly destroying someone's reputation at their own charity gala to teach them that a child's worth isn't measured by their grandmother's approval. My name is Rachel Monroe, and I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would destroy someone's life in front of 200 people. But then again, I never thought I'd watch my 9-year-old daughter's heart break on Christmas morning while my mother-in-law smiled like she'd just performed an act of charity. It was 10:30 in the morning when the gift-giving began at the Monroe family estate in Cleveland Heights. The house itself was a testament to old money marble floors that echoed with every footstep, crystal chandeliers that cost more than my annual salary, and enough square footage to house 3 families comfortably. I'd grown up in a modest ranch house where we celebrated Christmas around a 6-foot tree from the local lot. Here, the tree stretched 15 feet toward a coffered ceiling, decorated by professionals who charged more for their services than most people made in a month. I should have known something was wrong when Margaret Monroe, my mother-in-law, kept glancing at me with that particular smile she reserved for moments when she was about to remind everyone exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. 36 years old, and I still felt like that nervous girl from the wrong side of town whenever I walked into this house. My daughter Lily sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, her Christmas dress the nicest one I could afford, suddenly looking shabby next to her cousin's designer outfits. At 9 years old, she still believed in the magic of Christmas morning, still trusted that being good all year meant something when the presents were handed out. Now for the special gifts," Margaret announced, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant she was about to make a production of her generosity. She was 63, silver-haired, and had perfected the art of looking elegant while delivering psychological warfare. "I have something very special for my grandchildren this year." She reached into a large gift bag and pulled out the first box. iPhone 16 Pro Max. Top of the line. Worth more than my car payment. "For my grandson Michael," she said, handing the gleaming box to my brother-in-law's 14-year-old son. His face lit up like he'd won the lottery. The second box went to Jessica, my sister-in-law's 12-year-old daughter. Same phone, same delighted squeal. The third box went to David, the youngest cousin at 11. Same phone, same family joy. I watched my daughter's face as each gift was distributed. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap the way I'd taught her. But I could see the hope building in her eyes with each iPhone that appeared. Lily had been asking for a phone for months, not because she needed one, but because she wanted to feel grown up like her cousins. Then Margaret reached into the bag again and pulled out a $25 gift card to Target. "And for Lily," she said, her voice dropping just enough to make everyone lean in. "Something more age-appropriate." The silence in the room was deafening. 20 adults and 4 children, and you could have heard a pin drop on that expensive rug. Lily took the gift card with both hands, her smile never wavering, but I saw her bottom lip tremble just once. "Thank you, Grandma Margaret," Lily whispered, because she was polite and kind and everything a 9-year-old should be. Margaret's smile widened. "You're welcome, dear. I thought long and hard about what each child deserved this Christmas, and I believe in giving appropriate gifts." That word "deserved" hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. My husband Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me, his jaw tight, but he said nothing. He never said anything when his mother wielded her particular brand of cruelty. I looked around the room at the faces of my in-laws. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed almost satisfied, as if they'd been waiting for this moment. The moment when Margaret would remind everyone that my daughter, the granddaughter who came from unfortunate circumstances, wasn't quite family in the same way the others were. Lily held that gift card like it was treasure, but I saw the exact moment her childhood understanding of fairness cracked. She glanced at her cousins with their gleaming new phones. Then, down at her $25 consolation prize, and something shifted behind her eyes. She was 9 years old, and she was learning that love in this family came with conditions she'd never be able to meet. That was the moment I decided Margaret Monroe had made her last mistake. She could humiliate me all she wanted. I'd grown used to her subtle digs about my background, my clothes, my inability to contribute to their private school fundraisers. But hurting my daughter, teaching her that she was somehow less worthy of love and generosity, that crossed a line I didn't even know existed until she'd obliterated it. As the family moved on to coffee and Margaret's catered Christmas brunch, I pulled my daughter aside. "Mama," Lily whispered, her voice small and confused, "why didn't I get a phone like the others?" I knelt down to her level, looking into those trusting brown eyes, and made a promise that would change everything. "Because some people don't know your worth yet, baby," I said quietly. "But they're going to learn." I met Daniel Monroe 7 years ago at a coffee shop near Case Western, where I was finishing my nursing degree, and he was grabbing lunch between meetings at his family's investment firm. He was different from the other wealthy men I'd encountered, genuine, down to earth, with calloused hands that told me he wasn't afraid of real work despite his trust fund. When he asked me out, I thought I'd won the lottery. What I didn't realize was that marrying into the Monroe family meant entering a battlefield where I'd never learned the rules. Daniel's father had built Monroe Capital from nothing, starting as a machinist and working his way up to owning 3 manufacturing plants across Ohio. When he died 5 years ago, he left behind a fortune and a widow who'd spent 30 years perfecting the art of social climbing. Margaret had transformed herself from a factory worker's wife into Cleveland's idea of aristocracy, and she guarded that image like a dragon guarding gold. From our very first meeting, Margaret made it clear that I was a threat to everything she'd built. I'll never forget sitting in their formal dining room, the one with the oil paintings of people who weren't even related to them, while she questioned me about my background over 7 courses I couldn't pronounce. "Nursing is such a practical profession," she'd said, the word practical dripping with disdain. Daniel's previous girlfriend was finishing her doctorate in art history at Yale. Daniel had reached for my hand under the table, but even then, I could see the way he shrank when his mother spoke. 33 years old, and he still sought her approval like a child afraid of disappointing mommy. The pattern established itself quickly. Family dinners where I'd be seated at the far end of the table, charity events where I'd somehow be left off the invitation list until the last minute, Christmas mornings where my gifts were always practical dish towels, generic perfume, things that said, "You're the help, not family." When Lily was born, I hoped things would change. A grandchild, I thought, would soften Margaret's edges. Instead, it made everything worse. Margaret took one look at Lily's dark hair and olive skin features she'd inherited from my Italian grandmother, and I saw the disappointment flash across her face. This wasn't the blonde, blue-eyed grandchild who would photograph well for the society pages. "She's very ethnic-looking," Margaret had commented when Lily was barely a week old. "I suppose that comes from your side." The criticism started early and never stopped. Lily's clothes were always wrong, too colorful, too casual, not sophisticated enough for a Monroe. Her interests were dismissed as common. When she showed talent for art, Margaret suggested she focus on something more practical, like her mother. When Lily brought home straight A's, Margaret would mention how her other grandchildren were in accelerated programs. The worst part was watching Daniel navigate it all. He loved his daughter fiercely, but he'd been conditioned since childhood to avoid confronting his mother. Whenever I tried to discuss Margaret's behavior, he'd make excuses. "She doesn't mean it that way," he'd say. "She's just particular about things." "She's teaching our daughter that she's not good enough," I'd reply. "She'll come around. She just needs time." But time only made it worse. Margaret's influence extended beyond family dinners and holiday gatherings. She had connections at the private schools, the country clubs, the social organizations that defined Cleveland's upper class. With a few carefully placed words, She could make sure Lily was never quite included, never quite accepted. I watched my daughter start to internalize these messages. At 6, Lily asked why Grandma Margaret hugged her cousins longer. At 7, she wondered if she should cut her hair blonde like Cousin Jessica. At 8, she stopped talking about art because Grandma says it's not important. The breaking point should have come earlier, but I kept hoping Daniel would finally stand up to his mother. I kept believing that family loyalty meant something, that blood would trump Margaret's prejudices. I was wrong. The iPhone incident wasn't the first time Margaret had publicly humiliated Lily, but it was the most calculated. She'd planned it, purchased those phones weeks in advance, and orchestrated the entire scene to send a message, not just to Lily, but to me. The message was clear: know your place. On the drive home from Christmas morning, Lily sat quietly in the back seat while Daniel and I maintained a tense silence. It wasn't until we were pulling into our driveway, our modest 2-story in a middle-class neighborhood that Margaret referred to as quaint, that the dam finally burst. "How could you just sit there?" I asked Daniel as soon as we were inside. "What was I supposed to do, make a scene in front of everyone?" "Yes, you were supposed to make a scene. You were supposed to protect your daughter." "It's just a phone. Rachel, she's 9. She doesn't need a phone anyway." I stared at him. This man I'd loved for 7 years and realized he still didn't understand. It was never about the phone. "She told our daughter she didn't deserve what the other children got," I said slowly. "She looked a 9-year-old in the eye and told her she wasn't worthy. And you think that's acceptable because it's just a phone?" Daniel's face crumpled. For a moment, I saw the man who'd fallen in love with a nurse from the wrong side of town. The man who'd promised to build a life with me away from his mother's influence. "I don't know how to fight her," he whispered. "I never have." That night, after Daniel had gone to bed, I found Lily in her room writing in the diary Santa had brought her. "What are you writing about, sweetheart?" She looked up at me with those serious brown eyes. "I'm making a list of ways to be better so Grandma Margaret will love me like she loves the others." My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. My 9-year-old daughter was creating a self-improvement plan to earn the love that should have been unconditional. That's when I knew Daniel wasn't the only one who needed to learn how to fight. The Christmas morning scene replays in my mind like a horror movie I can't turn off. Even now, 3 weeks later, I can see every detail with painful clarity, the way Margaret's manicured fingers held those iPhone boxes like weapons, the excited chatter of the other children, and most devastatingly, the exact moment my daughter's face fell when she realized she was different. It was 9:45 in the morning when Margaret began her performance. She'd positioned herself in front of the massive fireplace, the family patriarch holding court, with all 4 grandchildren arranged on the floor before her like supplicants. The morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows caught the crystal ornaments on the tree, casting rainbow reflections that should have been magical but instead felt mocking. "These are very special gifts," Margaret had announced, her voice carrying that theatrical quality she used when she wanted to ensure everyone was paying attention. "I've chosen them very carefully for each of my grandchildren." The first iPhone went to Michael, 14 and Margaret's obvious favorite. He was tall like his father, with the kind of athletic build that photographed well for the country club newsletter. His reaction was everything Margaret wanted: pure joy, a tight hug, promises to call her every day. "This is the best gift ever. Grandma," he'd exclaimed, and Margaret's smile could have powered the entire house. Jessica received the second phone with a squeal that probably registered on seismographs. At 12, she was already developing Margaret's sense of drama, throwing her arms around her grandmother and declaring her the most amazing grandma in the world. David, 11 and quiet by nature, simply grinned and whispered "thank you" as he clutched his phone like a treasure. And then came Lily's turn. My daughter had been sitting perfectly straight, hands folded in her lap, wearing the red velvet dress I'd bought on sale at Macy's. Next to her cousins in their designer outfits, she looked like a little girl playing dress-up, and I could see Margaret's eyes taking in every detail: the slightly wrinkled hem, the patent leather shoes from Target, the simple ribbon in her hair. Margaret reached into her bag with deliberate slowness, building suspense, but instead of the familiar iPhone box, she pulled out a small envelope. The Target gift card was bad enough, $25 less than what she'd probably spent on flower arrangements for the morning, but it was the way Margaret presented it that made my blood freeze. "For Lily," she said, and her voice had changed. Gone was the warm, grandmotherly tone she'd used with the others. This was cooler, more measured, something more suitable for a child her age. I felt Daniel tense beside me, but when I looked at him, hoping for some sign that he would intervene, he was staring at his hands. Lily accepted the gift card with the grace of a child who'd been taught proper manners, but I saw the confusion in her eyes. She was 9, old enough to understand that she'd been excluded, but young enough to blame herself rather than the adult who'd orchestrated the humiliation. What do you say, Lily?" Daniel prompted gently, and I wanted to scream at him for making her perform gratitude for this insult. "Thank you, Grandma Margaret," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret's smile was razor-sharp. "You're very welcome, dear. I believe children should receive gifts that are appropriate for their circumstances." That word circumstances hit me like a physical blow. In Margaret's world, circumstances meant everything. It meant the difference between growing up in Cleveland Heights versus my neighborhood. It meant trust funds versus nursing school loans. It meant being worthy of love versus being tolerated. The other adults in the room seemed frozen. Daniel's sister Sarah looked uncomfortable but said nothing. His brother Mark was suddenly very interested in his coffee cup. Margaret's sister Eleanor actually nodded approvingly, as if she'd witnessed good parenting in action. But it was my brother-in-law Tom who finally broke the silence. "Jesus, Mom," he muttered, shaking his head. "She's 9 years old." Margaret's expression didn't change. "I know exactly how old she is, Thomas, and I know what's appropriate for each of my grandchildren." The conversation moved on, but the damage was done. I watched Lily try to engage with her cousins about their new phones, watched her pretend that a gift card was just as exciting as the latest technology, watched her smile grow smaller and smaller as the morning wore on. When we finally left at 2 in the afternoon, Lily clutched that gift card like it was precious, because that's the kind of child she was, grateful even when she was being mistreated, kind even when kindness wasn't returned. The ride home was silent except for the Christmas music on the radio, which felt increasingly obscene as we drove through neighborhoods where normal families were having normal holiday celebrations. Daniel kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, but I couldn't look at him. I was afraid of what he'd see in my eyes. It wasn't until we were pulling into our driveway that Lily finally spoke. "Mama," her voice was small and uncertain, "did I do something wrong?" The question broke something inside me, not just my heart, but something deeper, my faith in the idea that being good would be enough, that treating people with kindness would eventually be reciprocated, that my daughter could somehow earn her place in this family through merit alone. "No, baby," I said, turning to face her. "You didn't do anything wrong." "Then why didn't I get a phone like the others?" Daniel started to answer, probably with some gentle lie about age or need, but I cut him off. "Because some people are mean," I said, "even when they're supposed to love us." That night, after we'd forced our way through a Christmas dinner neither of us wanted to eat, after Lily had gone to bed clutching that gift card like it might transform into something better while she slept, I confronted Daniel properly. "This ends now," I told him. He was sitting at our kitchen table, still wearing his Christmas sweater, looking like a man who'd watched his world collapse and didn't know how to rebuild it. "I know," he said quietly. "I should have said something." You should have said something the first time she treated our daughter differently. You should have said something when she made those comments about Lily's appearance. You should have said something every single time your mother made it clear that our child isn't worthy of the same love as her cousins." Daniel's face crumpled. "I don't know how to fight her. Rachel, I never have. Then you better learn, I said, because I'm done watching her destroy our daughter's self-worth while you stand by and let it happen. The war had been declared. Margaret had thrown down the gauntlet on Christmas morning, and now it was time for her to learn what happened when you went after someone's child. She wanted to talk about what people deserved. Perfect. It was time for her to get exactly what she deserved. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came 2 days after Christmas. I found Lily in her room at 7:30 in the morning, not playing with her new toys, but carefully organizing them into 2 piles. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" She looked up at me with those earnest brown eyes that had always been able to see straight through to my soul. "I'm deciding what to give away." My stomach dropped. "Give away? Why would you give away your Christmas presents?" "Maybe if I give some toys to kids who don't have any, God will see that I'm good and tell Grandma Margaret that I deserve nice things too." I had to excuse myself to the bathroom where I cried silently for 10 minutes. My 9-year-old daughter was trying to buy love through charity, convinced that her worth was somehow tied to her grandmother's approval. The diary entries were even worse. I hadn't meant to read them. I was putting away her laundry when the little pink journal fell open on her bed. The words were written in her careful 3rd-grade handwriting. December 26th. Maybe I need to be better so Grandma will love me. I will practice being more quiet like Cousin Jessica. I will ask Mama to buy me different clothes. December 27th. I counted my Christmas money. If I save all of it and don't buy anything, maybe I can get enough to buy my own phone and show Grandma I'm responsible. December 28th. I looked in the mirror today and tried to see what's wrong with me. Maybe if I was prettier or smarter, Grandma would think I deserve good things. Each entry was a knife to my heart. This beautiful, intelligent, kind child was dissecting herself, trying to find the flaw that made her unworthy of her grandmother's love. That afternoon, I called Dr. Sarah Williams, a child psychologist who'd been recommended by our pediatrician. I needed professional help understanding how to undo the damage Margaret had inflicted. "I can see her tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Dr. Williams said after I'd explained the situation. "But I want to prepare you children. Lily's age are particularly vulnerable to this kind of rejection from family members. It can have lasting effects on self-esteem and attachment." The appointment was devastating in its clarity. Dr. Williams spent an hour with Lily, using art therapy and gentle questioning to understand how my daughter saw herself and her place in the family. When Lily left the room to play in the waiting area, Dr. Williams pulled no punches. "Your daughter is internalizing the message that love is conditional and that she's somehow deficient," she said. "She's developing what we call learned helplessness, the belief that no matter what she does, she can't change her circumstances or earn the love she craves." "How bad is it?" Dr. Williams looked at me seriously. "If this pattern continues, if she keeps receiving the message that she's less valuable than her cousins, it will affect every relationship she has for the rest of her life. She'll struggle with self-worth, have difficulty maintaining healthy boundaries, and may spend her adult life trying to earn love from people who will never give it." The words hit me like a physical blow. Margaret wasn't just being cruel, she was actively damaging my child's psychological development. "What can I do?" "First, you need to completely remove her from these toxic interactions. No more family gatherings where she's treated as lesser. No more exposure to people who make her feel unworthy. Second, you need to consistently reinforce her value not based on achievement or behavior, but simply because she exists and deserves love. And third," Dr. Williams hesitated. "Third, you need to understand that children learn not just from what we tell them, but from what they see us accept. If Lily watches you tolerate this treatment, she'll learn that this is normal, that people who claim to love us are allowed to hurt us." That night, I had another conversation with Daniel. This time, I armed myself with Dr. Williams' assessment and a clarity that felt like steel in my spine. "The psychologist says if we don't stop this now, Margaret will damage Lily permanently," I told him. "Not just hurt her feelings. actually alter her brain's development and her ability to form healthy relationships. Daniel sat heavily on our couch, his head in his hands. What do you want me to do? I want you to choose, your mother or your daughter, because you can't protect both. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed bitterly. Was it fair when your mother told our 9-year-old she didn't deserve what her cousins got? Was it fair when she made Lily believe there's something wrong with her? Was it fair when she stood in front of our entire family and humiliated a child? The fight went on until 2 in the morning. Daniel kept trying to find middle ground, some way to maintain family peace while protecting Lily, but I was done with compromises. There is no middle ground, I told him. Margaret declared war on our daughter on Christmas morning. The only question now is whether you're going to stand with your child or with the woman who's destroying her. The breaking point came the next evening when Lily asked me a question that shattered any remaining illusions I had about this being fixable. "Mama," she said as I was tucking her into bed, "do you think if I was never born, Daddy would be happier with his family?" I stared at my daughter, this miracle child who'd brought such joy to my life, and realized she was contemplating her own erasure as a solution to family conflict. "Why would you ask me that, baby?" "Because then Daddy wouldn't have to choose between us and Grandma Margaret, and maybe everyone would get along better if I wasn't here to cause problems." That's when I knew that Dr. Williams was right. This wasn't about family drama or hurt feelings anymore. This was about saving my daughter's soul before Margaret Monroe destroyed it completely. "Lily," I said, sitting on the edge of her bed and taking her small hands in mine, "you are the best thing that ever happened to your daddy and me. You didn't cause any problems. You're perfect exactly as you are, and anyone who can't see that is the one with the problem." But I could see in her eyes that she didn't quite believe me. The poison Margaret had injected was already working its way through my daughter's system, convincing her that she was the problem that needed to be solved. That night, after Lily was asleep, I made a decision that would change everything. Margaret Monroe wanted to destroy my daughter's sense of self-worth. Fine. But turnabout was fair play. It was time for Margaret to learn what it felt like to have her own worth questioned in front of everyone who mattered to her. If she wanted a war, she was going to get one. Planning Margaret's downfall became my obsession. I spent sleepless nights at 3 in the morning researching everything about her carefully constructed public image, studying her social media presence, her charity work, her position on various boards. What I discovered was both enlightening and infuriating. Margaret Monroe had built her entire identity around being Cleveland's premier philanthropist and family woman. Her Instagram was a masterclass in image curation, photos of her at charity galas, family portraits that somehow never included Lily, posts about the importance of family values that made my stomach turn. She served on the boards of 3 major charities, was a founding member of the Cleveland Women's Leadership Council, and had been featured in Cleveland Magazine as one of the city's most influential women 2 years running. But most importantly, I learned that her reputation was everything to her. Every carefully worded social media post, every photo opportunity, every public appearance was designed to reinforce the image of Margaret Monroe as a woman of grace, dignity, and family devotion. That image was about to become her Achilles heel. My first ally came from an unexpected source. Daniel's sister Sarah called me on New Year's Eve, her voice shaking with barely controlled emotion. "I need to tell you something about Christmas morning," she said, "about what Mom did to Lily." We met for coffee the next day at a small cafe far from the Monroe family's usual haunts. Sarah looked exhausted, like she'd been carrying a heavy burden for too long. "I've been watching Mom treat you and Lily differently for years," she admitted. "I told myself it wasn't my business, that she'd come around eventually, but Christmas morning..." She shook her head. "I went home and couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Lily's face." "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah pulled out her phone. "Because I recorded it." My heart stopped. "What?" "I was taking a video of the kids opening presents for my husband. He was working that morning. I got the whole thing. Mom's speech about appropriate gifts and circumstances. The way she singled Lily out. Everything. She showed me the video. Watching it again was like reliving a nightmare, but this time I noticed details I'd missed in the moment. The satisfied look on Margaret's face when she delivered the gift card, the way she emphasized certain words, the calculating pause before she spoke about what each child deserved. "I want to help," Sarah said quietly. "I should have spoken up years ago, and I didn't. Let me help you now." The second piece of evidence came from Daniel's cousin Emma, who reached out after Sarah told her what we were planning. Emma had been on the receiving end of Margaret's manipulation for years, passed over for family business opportunities, excluded from important decisions, always made to feel like a second-class member of the family. "She's been doing this for decades," Emma told me during a phone call that lasted until 11:30 at night. "Creating hierarchies, deciding who deserves what, punishing people who don't meet her standards. I have emails going back 5 years where she explicitly discusses which family members are worthy of inclusion in various events." Emma forwarded me a treasure trove of correspondence. Margaret's emails were clinical in their cruelty, discussing family members like assets to be managed rather than people to be loved. One particularly damning email from last summer discussed Lily specifically. "I don't think it's appropriate to include Rachel's daughter in the Nantucket trip. She doesn't fit with the other children, and I worry about the impression it would give to our guests. Some families simply have different standards, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise." The email had been sent to Daniel, who had never mentioned it to me. When I confronted him about it, his face crumpled with shame. "I thought if I just ignored it, she'd stop," he said weakly. You thought if you ignored your mother calling our daughter unworthy, she'd magically become a better person." But his betrayal, painful as it was, gave me another piece of evidence. I started going through his emails with his permission, finding months of correspondence where Margaret systematically excluded Lily from family events, trips, and opportunities given freely to her other grandchildren. The third ally surprised me most of all. Margaret's housekeeper, Rosa, had worked for the family for 15 years. She'd watched Margaret's treatment of Lily with growing discomfort, and when Sarah quietly approached her, Rosa revealed that she'd kept a detailed journal of the family's interactions, a habit she'd developed to protect herself from Margaret's tendency to blame staff for her own mistakes. "That woman, she has no love in her heart for that beautiful little girl," Rosa told me in accented English when we met secretly at her apartment. "She says terrible things when she thinks nobody hears. Last week, she tells her sister on the phone that Lily is a constant reminder of Daniel's poor choices." Rosa had overheard dozens of phone conversations where Margaret discussed Lily in terms that ranged from dismissive to outright cruel. She'd seen Margaret deliberately exclude Lily from photos, hide gifts meant for her, and instruct family members to treat her differently. "I stay quiet because I need this job," Rosa said, tears in her eyes. "But what she does to that child, it's not right. If you need someone to tell the truth about what she really says, I will do it." The final piece of my plan crystallized when I learned about Margaret's upcoming charity gala. The Cleveland Children's Foundation benefit was her crown jewel event, the annual fundraiser where she played Queen Bee to Cleveland's elite. This year's theme was "Every Child Deserves Love and Support," which would have been ironic if it weren't so perfectly suited to my purposes. Margaret had been planning this event for months. It would be held at the Cleveland Museum of Art, with over 300 guests including the mayor, local news personalities, and everyone who mattered in Cleveland society. Margaret would give the keynote speech about the importance of supporting all children, regardless of their circumstances. The hypocrisy was so blatant it took my breath away. I spent weeks planning every detail. The timing had to be perfect during Margaret's speech, when she'd be talking about the value of every child. The audio quality had to be crystal clear. The impact had to be devastating but professional. I researched the guest list, identifying key figures whose opinions Margaret valued most. I studied the venue layout, determining the best way to ensure maximum impact. I even practiced my own speaking voice, because I knew I'd only get one chance to make my case. The final preparation was the hardest. I sat Lily down and explained, in age-appropriate terms, that we were going to stop letting Grandma Margaret hurt her. "Are you going to make her say sorry?" Lily asked with 9-year-old optimism. "I'm going to make sure she can never hurt you again," I promised. 3 weeks before the gala, I sent Margaret a text. "Lily and I would love to attend your charity event. I know it means so much to you to support children who need advocates." Her response came 30 minutes later. "How lovely. I'll have 2 tickets set aside for you." She had no idea she'd just invited her own destruction to dinner. Everything was in place. The allies were ready. The evidence was compiled. The plan was flawless. Margaret Monroe was about to learn that some mothers don't just get mad when you hurt their children. Some mothers get even. The Cleveland Museum of Art had been transformed into Margaret's vision of philanthropic perfection. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in cream silk, each centerpiece a masterpiece of white orchids and gold accents that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. By 7:15 in the evening, Cleveland's elite had gathered in their finest attire, champagne glasses in hand, ready to celebrate their own generosity while writing tax-deductible checks. I arrived fashionably late at 7:45, wearing a red dress that I'd bought specifically for this moment, not because it was expensive, but because it was bold, in a sea of safe blacks and muted jewel tones. I wanted to stand out. Lily walked beside me in a matching red dress, her hair in an elegant updo that had taken me an hour to perfect. If we were going to war, we were going to look magnificent doing it. Margaret spotted us immediately from her position near the podium, her smile faltering for just a moment before snapping back into place. She was in her element tonight, silver hair perfectly coiffed, wearing a navy blue gown that screamed old money elegance, surrounded by admirers hanging on her every word about the importance of supporting disadvantaged children. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Ah, Rachel," she called out, gliding over to us with the practiced grace of a woman who'd spent decades working rooms like this. "How wonderful that you could make it. And Lily, don't you look lovely?" Even her compliments carried daggers. The slight pause before lovely, the way her eyes swept over Lily's dress with barely concealed disapproval, Margaret couldn't help herself. "We wouldn't miss it," I replied smoothly. "Lily was so excited to come to an event about supporting all children. Weren't you, sweetheart?" Lily nodded solemnly, still intimidated by her grandmother but trusting me to protect her. I squeezed her hand 3 times our secret code for "I love you" and felt her squeeze back. The dinner conversation was excruciating in its normalcy. I sat at table 12, strategically placed far enough from the head table to be forgotten, but close enough to the speaker's podium to execute my plan. Sarah was at my table, along with Emma and several family friends who had no idea they were about to witness the social equivalent of a nuclear explosion. Margaret worked the room like the professional she was, stopping at each table to share personalized anecdotes about the Foundation's work. At 8:45, she reached our table, her smile warm and practiced. "I'm so proud of tonight's turnout," she said, placing a manicured hand on my shoulder. "It's wonderful to see so many people who care about children's welfare." "It really is," I agreed. "Children deserve so much love and support, regardless of their circumstances." Margaret's eyes sharpened slightly at my emphasis on the word circumstances, but her smile never wavered. "Exactly. Every child should feel valued and cherished by their family." The lies rolled off her tongue so smoothly, I almost admired her skill. Almost. Dinner ended at 9:30, and Margaret took the stage to thunderous applause. She looked radiant under the spotlights, every inch the benevolent matriarch addressing her devoted subjects. "Good evening, friends," she began, her voice carrying perfectly through the microphone system. "Thank you for joining me tonight in support of the Cleveland Children's Foundation. As many of you know, this cause is particularly close to my heart because I believe deeply and passionately that every child deserves unconditional love and support." The audience murmured appreciative agreement, Several people nodded in my direction, probably thinking how lucky Lily was to have such a caring grandmother. Margaret continued her speech, building to her crescendo about family values and the importance of treating all children with equal dignity. She talked about her own grandchildren, how they'd taught her about the pure, innocent love that children deserve from the adults in their lives. "As a grandmother myself," she said, placing her hand over her heart in a gesture that looked sincere if you didn't know better. "I cannot imagine treating any child as less than precious. Family should be a safe haven where children learn their worth, where they understand that they are loved simply for existing." That was my cue. I stood up from my seat, my red dress impossible to miss under the museum's lighting. Margaret's eyes found me immediately, confusion flickering across her face as I began walking toward the front of the room. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think everyone here should know exactly what kind of family values Margaret Monroe really practices." The room erupted in whispers. Margaret's face went pale, then flushed red as she realized what was happening. "Rachel, please sit down," she said into the microphone, trying to maintain control. "This isn't appropriate." "You want to talk about what's appropriate?" I pulled out my phone, where I had the Christmas morning video queued up and ready. "Let's talk about what's appropriate for a grandmother to say to her 9-year-old granddaughter." I'd connected my phone to a portable speaker that Sarah had helped me smuggle in. The audio quality was perfect as Margaret's voice filled the elegant museum space. "For Lily, something more suitable for a child her age. I believe children should receive gifts that are appropriate for their circumstances. I thought long and hard about what each child deserved this Christmas." The silence in the room was deafening. 300 of Cleveland's most influential people listened as Margaret Monroe told a 9-year-old child she didn't deserve what her cousins received. The contrast between her speech about unconditional love and the cold cruelty in her recorded voice was devastating. Margaret stood frozen at the podium, her perfect composure finally cracking. For the first time in years, she had no control over the narrative. "This is what Margaret Monroe's family values look like," I continued, my voice steady and clear. "A 9-year-old child told she doesn't deserve the same love and generosity as her cousins. A grandmother who measures a child's worth by her own prejudices and social climbing." I looked directly at Margaret as I delivered the final blow. "You want to support children's welfare. Start with your own granddaughter." The room erupted. Cameras flashed as reporters captured Margaret's humiliation. Board members looked at each other in shock. The mayor stood up and quietly walked toward the exit. Margaret finally found her voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper into the microphone. "You have no right." "I have every right," I said firmly. "I'm her mother, and I will not let you destroy my daughter's self-worth while pretending to be a champion for children." I took Lily's hand and we walked out of that museum with our heads held high, leaving Margaret Monroe to face the consequences of her own cruelty for the first time in her privileged life. The war was over. Margaret had lost. And my daughter finally understood that she was worth fighting for. The fallout began before we even reached the parking lot. My phone started buzzing at 10:15 as we walked to the car, text messages and calls flooding in from numbers I didn't recognize. By the time I'd buckled Lily into her booster seat, 3 different news outlets had already requested interviews. "Mama, why is your phone making so much noise?" Lily asked as we drove home through the quiet Cleveland streets. "Because sometimes when you stand up for what's right, people notice," I told her. What I didn't tell her was that the video of Margaret's humiliation was already going viral. Someone had live-streamed my confrontation, and within hours, Grandma Gate was trending on social media. The contrast between Margaret's speech about loving all children and the audio of her dismissing Lily was devastating in its clarity. The first casualty was swift and decisive. At 11:45 that night, I received an email from the Cleveland Children's Foundation Board. Margaret Monroe had been asked to resign her position effective immediately. The organization couldn't be associated with someone who publicly demonstrated exactly the kind of family dysfunction they were trying to prevent. Daniel came home at 1:30 in the morning, looking like he'd aged 10 years in a single evening. I was waiting for him in our living room, still wearing the red dress that had become my armor. "The whole family is in chaos," he said, collapsing into his chair. "Mom's locked herself in her room and won't come out. Mark is furious at you for airing family business. Sarah is crying. Emma says you're a hero." "And what do you say?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "I say I should have done it myself years ago." The admission hung between us like a bridge we could finally cross. Daniel had spent 38 years as Margaret's son, but tonight he'd finally chosen to be Lily's father. "She called me 27 times, he continued, screaming about how you'd destroyed her reputation, how the family would never recover from the scandal. How dare I let my wife humiliate her in front of everyone she knows? And I told her that she did this to herself, that if she didn't want to be exposed as someone who emotionally abuses children, she shouldn't have emotionally abused our child." I felt something inside my chest unclench for the first time in months. My husband had finally found his spine. The morning brought a media circus. By 8 o'clock, there were 2 news vans parked outside our house and reporters calling our landline every 15 minutes. The story had legs, wealthy grandmother publicly humiliates grandchild at charity event, and Cleveland's news cycle was hungry for details. I gave exactly 1 interview to Channel 5's morning show, because their anchor was a mother herself, and I knew she'd understand the story from the right angle. "Mrs. Monroe," she asked, "some people are saying you went too far by exposing family business so publicly. How do you respond to that?" Child abuse stops being family business the moment it starts damaging a child's development. I replied, "My daughter was being psychologically harmed by someone who was supposed to love her unconditionally. When private conversations and family interventions fail, sometimes public accountability is the only thing left." The interview aired at noon and was picked up by national outlets by 3 in the afternoon. Suddenly, our story wasn't just Cleveland news, it was trending on CNN, Fox, and MSNBC. Parenting experts weighed in. Child psychologists discussed the long-term effects of favoritism. Social media exploded with people sharing their own stories of toxic family dynamics. Margaret's carefully curated image crumbled like a house of cards. By Tuesday, she'd been removed from 2 additional charity boards. The Cleveland Women's Leadership Council quietly asked her to step down. Her weekly column in the society pages was suspended indefinitely. But the most satisfying consequence came from an unexpected source. Margaret's housekeeper Rosa called me Wednesday evening, her voice bright with something I'd never heard before: joy. "Mrs. Rachel," she said, "I need to tell you something wonderful. Today, Mrs. Monroe, she tries to blame me for the video. She says I must have helped you, that I betrayed the family. She screams at me like always." "I'm sorry, Rosa. I never wanted you to get in trouble." No, you don't understand. This time, I don't say nothing. This time, I look at her and I say, "Mrs. Monroe, I work for 15 years in this house. I see how you treat that beautiful little girl. I see how you make her feel small and unwanted. You want to fire me good. I don't want to work for someone with no heart." Rosa laughed, a sound of pure liberation. She stares at me with her mouth open like a fish. Then I take off my apron, I put it on the counter, and I walk out. Just like that. The family fractures became permanent over the following weeks. Mark and his wife sided with Margaret, cutting off contact with Daniel and claiming we'd destroyed family unity. But Sarah and Emma stood firm in their support, finally free to express years of frustration with Margaret's manipulative behavior. Tom, Daniel's youngest brother, surprised everyone by showing up at our house on a Saturday morning with his 2 kids and a sincere apology. "I should have said something years ago," he told me while his children played with Lily in our backyard. "Mom's been pulling this divide and conquer crap for decades, making some family members feel special while treating others like outsiders. You just had the guts to call her out on it. The most important change was in Lily herself. The transformation wasn't immediate healing, rarely is, but gradually. I watched my daughter's confidence rebuild. She stopped organizing her toys into worthy and unworthy piles. She stopped asking if she was good enough. She started drawing again, creating vibrant pictures that she hung proudly on her bedroom wall without seeking permission or approval. 3 weeks after the gala, Lily asked me a question that proved the healing had begun. "Mama, was I really not doing anything wrong when Grandma Margaret was mean to me?" "You were perfect exactly as you were," I assured her. "Sometimes adults have problems that make them hurt children, but that's never the child's fault." She considered this seriously. "So when people are mean to me, it's because they have problems, not because I'm not good enough." "Exactly." Lily nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Can we get ice cream? Not because I was good or bad, just because ice cream is nice." I laughed and pulled her into a hug. "Absolutely. We deserve ice cream just because we exist." Margaret Monroe had wanted to teach my daughter about what she deserved. Mission accomplished, just not in the way she'd intended. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of Lily's bedroom watching her video call with her cousins, all of them, including the ones whose parents had initially sided with Margaret. Time has a way of clarifying things, and even Mark had eventually admitted that what his mother did was wrong, though he'd never quite apologized for defending her. "Wah, look what I drew." Lily held up a picture of our family Daniel, me, and her, all holding hands under a bright yellow sun. No shadows, no missing pieces, no hidden meanings about worth or belonging, just a 9-year-old's pure vision of love. Margaret Monroe had been conspicuously absent from family gatherings since the gala incident. She'd retreated to her estate like a deposed queen, maintaining the fiction that she was the victim of an ungrateful daughter-in-law's vindictive campaign. A few loyal friends still visited, but her social circle had shrunk dramatically. Cleveland society has a long memory for public humiliation. The real victory, though, wasn't Margaret's downfall, it was Lily's resurrection. My daughter bloomed like a flower finally given proper sunlight. Her teacher called to tell me that Lily had started participating more in class discussions. She'd made new friends. Her art had become more colorful, more confident. Most importantly, she'd stopped that heartbreaking habit of asking if she was good enough. "Mama," she said one evening as I tucked her into bed, "I'm glad you stood up to Grandma Margaret." "Why's that, sweetheart?" "Because now I know that when someone is mean to me, it's not because I'm not good enough, it's because they forgot how to be kind." The wisdom of children never ceased to amaze me. Lily had distilled the entire experience into a truth that took most adults decades to learn: other people's cruelty says nothing about your worth and everything about their character. Daniel had changed too. The man who'd spent years avoiding confrontation with his mother had found his voice. He'd established firm boundaries: no more family events where Lily might be excluded, no more tolerance for disparaging comments, no more choosing his mother's comfort over his daughter's well-being. "I wasted too many years being afraid of her," he told me one night as we sat on our back porch, watching Lily chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "I thought keeping the peace was more important than protecting our child." "You found your way eventually," I said. "That's what matters." The extended family dynamics had settled into a new normal. Sarah and Emma had become genuine allies, finally free to express years of suppressed frustration with Margaret's favoritism. Tom's family joined us for regular Sunday dinners where all the children were treated equally, a novel concept that took some adjustment but felt revolutionary after years of Margaret's hierarchies. Even Rosa had found a happy ending. She'd started her own house-cleaning business and was thriving, finally free from the toxic environment Margaret had created. She sent me a Christmas card with a photo of her and her grandchildren, all of them smiling broadly. "Thank you for showing me that dignity matters more than paychecks," she'd written in careful handwriting. The media attention had eventually died down, but the impact lingered. I received emails from mothers across the country sharing their own stories of family members who played favorites with grandchildren. Some asked for advice. Others just wanted to know they weren't alone in protecting their children from relatives who confused love with control. I always wrote back with the same message: your child's emotional safety is worth more than family peace. Sometimes love requires war. Margaret had attempted one reconciliation, showing up at our door 3 months after the gala with what she probably thought was a peace offering, an expensive toy for Lily, and a stilted apology that focused more on her own humiliation than the harm she'd caused. "I think we can put this unfortunate incident behind us," she'd said, standing on our front porch in her designer coat, looking like she was conferring a great favor by gracing us with her presence. "No," I'd replied simply. "We can't. I'm offering to forgive. You're not welcome here until you understand that what you did was child abuse, not a difference of opinion about gift giving." She'd left in a huff, and we hadn't heard from her since. Daniel occasionally received guilt-laden emails about how I'd turned him against his family, but he deleted them without responding. The truth was, I hadn't turned him against his family. I'd simply refused to let his family destroy ours. As I watched Lily race around our backyard, her laughter echoing in the warm evening air, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, the one who'd absorbed insults and accepted crumbs, hoping that compliance would eventually earn acceptance. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood a fundamental truth: you teach people how to treat your children by what you're willing to accept. Margaret Monroe had wanted to teach my daughter about what she deserved. Mission accomplished. Lily now knew she deserved unconditional love, respect, and protection from the people who claimed to care about her. She deserved to grow up knowing her worth wasn't contingent on anyone else's approval. And if someone couldn't see her value, that wasn't Lily's problem to solve. Some people call what I did revenge. I call it justice. There's a difference between hurting someone for pleasure and exposing someone to protect your child. Margaret had built her reputation on a lie that she was a loving family matriarch who cherished all children equally. All I did was reveal the truth. The real victory wasn't destroying Margaret Monroe's social standing. It was watching my daughter reclaim her sense of self-worth, seeing her understand that she was enough, exactly as she was, without modification or apology. Margaret had said Lily didn't deserve what her cousins received. She was wrong. Lily deserved so much more. She deserved a family that celebrated her existence instead of tolerating it. And now she had one. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to hear from you. Comment below and let me know where you're listening from so we can connect with others who understand that protecting our children sometimes requires uncomfortable courage. Please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with truth.